Anand, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you're the CEO and co-founder of CB Insights, which you started in 2010.
Yep.
Tell us more about what CB Insights is.
So CB Insights aggregates data on private companies, and the goal being that anybody who's looking to invest, acquire, buy from, or sell to a private company, we can give you intelligence about who you should be talking to and who you should not be talking to.
And why did you decide to start a business like this? What was the gap or the need that you were trying to fill?
Yeah, so I was at American Express for a number of years. I used to run their innovation fund, and we used to buy data from other data providers, and I always thought that data was terrible. So I think a lot of entrepreneurial stories start that way. They just found a problem, and then we thought we could fix it. So myself and a couple guys from my old team left to build CB Insights. The other part of what we learned at Amex was that when they lent to private companies, so meaning they gave credit to private companies, they had a really hard time doing that. And so we thought we could build predictive models that would help influence decisions around private companies. And so kind of our long-term vision is to really score kind of all these private companies and help people understand which ones are the best ones and which ones are, not doing so well.
So who are your clients?
Our clients are pretty diverse. I would say, venture capital firms, corporate strategy, corporate M&A are big customer bases of ours. But then we also have salespeople and business development people. So people trying to find that next big, great private company are using us to try to prospect and identify companies. And then we have lots of what I'd call service providers. So people who are law firms, accounting firms, valuation firms, right? Advisors, investment banks. They're another big base. So yeah, we've kind of got a lot of different customers. I'd say we primarily focus on the business development and sort of the corporate and VC communities.
Mm-hmm. So basically data around startups, VCs also?
Yeah, so we track the startups, their investors, and their acquirers. So you can go and look up and analyze any of those entities. So globally, any type of private company, any sector, so everything from biofuels to big data to biotech, and then really early stage companies all the way through to kind of pre-IPO companies. So, two people who got 10K of angel investment all the way through to companies that are going to be going public on the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange in the next, few months.
Mm-hmm. And have you raised money?
We've raised what I'd call non-dilutive money. So we've raised money from the National Science Foundation. So we've gotten about $1.125 million from the National Science Foundation. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, we're kind of funded the old-fashioned way, which is by revenue. So we sell more than we spend every month.
So you are cash flow positive?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we're reinvesting all of that in the business. But it was 3 of us when we started. We're going to be hopefully 30 by the end of this year. And yeah, we've at least so far chosen not to raise outside capital.
Do you have an exit plan? Do you hope to get acquired? Do you hope to go IPO? What's your long-term plan?
Yeah, so we tend not to think about the exit a whole lot. I think we're trying to build a good, solid business. Somebody comes along with a similar vision and dumps, a dump truck of money in front of us. Obviously, we would talk to them. I think, but really, we're fundamentally focused on building a good business. We think there's a really big gap for this type for private companies in the marketplace. So, I think there's a huge potential to build a really massive data company. So we'd like to realize that vision. And so, we'll see what happens, but I don't think we're not building the company to exit necessarily. But we'll be opportunistic if it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Do you have competitors? Are there other people in this field?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of folks who are doing things that are some similar, some that are sort of adjacent. So we have a lot of like the traditional big sort of legacy information services companies. So think Dow Jones, Thomson, S&P has a product called Capital IQ. So we compete with them. I think there's areas of what we're doing that like Dun & Bradstreet would be a competitor to. And then, there's always been sort of fledgling companies that come in and out of the space. Mm-hmm. But I'd say kind of the big notable players, those are the main ones.
Mm-hmm. How do you get your information then if the companies are private and they don't have?
Good question. So we've built software that will crawl the web. So we crawl a little north of 150,000 sources daily, and we will find articles, tweets, blog posts, regulatory filings that talk about financing events or exit events, and we will pull out structured data from those sources. So it's all very machine learning kind of based. So about 75% of our data comes through that programmatic method. 25% of it is submitted to us directly from investors. So as our name has gotten out there and as we've become a little bit more prominent, investors are saying, well, we want to make sure you guys have the right data about us, because we know that companies that might acquire our portfolio companies might be using you. We know that investors in our funds might be using you. So there's, they're doing it, there's sort of a natural self-interest for them to give us their data. And so we were seeing more and more data submitted to us.
What interesting trends are you seeing in VC funding? For one thing, $10 billion valuations are becoming so much more common.
Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest, is we're just seeing there's just lots of money pouring into the private company sort of landscape. So we're seeing it's not just VCs, there's hedge funds, mutual funds, wealthy families, sovereign wealth funds, every corporation. So there's just, everybody's taking an interest in these companies, I think for different reasons, right? Some are purely financial, some are looking at it from a strategic and financial perspective. So I think that the asset class, if we can call it that, has just gotten bigger over time. Just entrepreneurship in general has become fashionable. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but we're just seeing a lot of startups, right, being formed, able to raise 25, 50, 100K relatively quickly, and kind of go pursue an idea, and hopefully it works and they can raise more money or they build a real business. But I'd say those are some of the big kind of macro trends. And then within industries, there's just a lot of very interesting things going on. There's the entire sort of wearable space, right? So all this mix of hardware and software that's happening right now. Next week there's the Apple event, and so there's all this chatter about what's happening in wearables and things like Internet of Things and cybersecurity, given all these hacks that seem to be happening daily, are really big areas. So we're just seeing lots of really interesting technologies and lots of interesting companies being formed now. I think there's a lot of things that are going to be very foundational and very disruptive to legacy industries that are being created now. I love what I do because we get to be on the front lines of watching these companies and seeing what's happening. So yeah, there's just a lot of activity right now.
Do you think that we're headed for a bubble?
It's definitely a little overheated right now. I worked at a company in the .com bubble boom. I think it's very different than that. So in that time period, if you were a tech company, you could go public and you were immediately valued at some ridiculous number. We don't see that right now. The public markets haven't sort of lost their mind. So I think when they lose their mind, then I would be willing to say that there's a bubble. I think right now there's early stage. There's lots of people jumping in thinking they can be the next big VC. I think a lot of them will lose their money, there will be some casualties, but I'm not sure it's a bubble. They'll sort of quietly die and go away, and you'll never hear of them. The big sort of stock market bubble, we're not really seeing right now.
Right. So there's a big difference in the way companies are being valued, companies are being looked at, the way people are putting money in now versus the way it was.
I think there's some irrationality at parts of the investment cycle right now, and I think the early stages probably has the most irrationality. The public markets are still relatively rational. So I think when everybody's crazy is when I can sort of say that there's a bubble. Right now, and especially when the public markets do it. But right now, it's sort of, I think, mostly relegated to maybe early to mid-stage investing, and even pockets of that. And again, if you add up all the money that those folks are investing that they might lose, it's not on the order of something that could have big economic implications, right? It's not, when you think about how big bonds and public equities are, startup and private company investing at the early stages is small potatoes.
Right. What sectors are receiving the most venture money now?
I think mobile is pretty big kind of category, but that's one of the hottest areas, right? So you have Uber and companies like that are just raising these gargantuan amounts of money that we think of as sort of mobile-first companies. Big data, cloud computing, cybersecurity, Internet of Things, these are all continuing to be hot areas. We're seeing actually a lot more activity in life sciences right now, so digital health, as well as biotech, medical devices. The IPO activity in those markets has actually been pretty strong this year. which has kind of maybe not been the norm as of late. So, but kind of across the board, like we're doing an analysis right now, pretty much all sectors and industries are seeing an uptick. So, it's sort of a rising tide is sort of lifting all ships right now.
CB Insights needs a fair amount of software engineers to run its business. Are you able to find the type of talent that you're looking for? Are there any skills gaps that you face?
Yeah, I mean, the market's really competitive right now. So I think the skills are out there, but you're just competing with so many new startups, and and then in New York you're competing against financial services firms that want that same talent, and sometimes we're competing against ad tech companies that want that talent. So I think the skills are there, but you have to sell that person on why you're the best opportunity, because they probably have lots of options, right? So I think that obviously there's a financial element to any such offer, but you have to also convince them of why they'll be doing meaningful work, and what they'll be contributing to your organization, and what your organization will give back to them. So so it's competitive. I think we would love to hire quicker than we're able to right now. If we could be 30 today, we would be 30 today, but it's just it takes longer than I think any of us would have expected to find good, solid talent. But yeah, I mean, I think we'd love to find more. I mean, we've sponsored H-1B visa, so we've tried to find other ways of accessing talent, and at least to expand the pool a little bit, and that's proven to be pretty. That's been proven to be pretty good for us. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my concern right now is that there's just, especially on the startup front, there's so many companies out there. I'm not sure that the pace of new company formation that's happening right now is really sustainable over a long period. I think a lot of people who are founders right now of companies probably should be employees at other startups, right? And so there's just, once I think that gets right-sized, there might be more talent that's available. So right now there is a gap because everybody wants to be a founder. Once that sort of gets more normal, and maybe it may never, but if that ever gets more normal, I think there is enough kind of quality folks out there. If it doesn't, and if this is just the way, if this is the new normal, yeah, then there's a skills gap, and we need more engineers for sure.
Do you think anything needs to be done here to make our talent more competitive?
This is not an area of expertise of mine. I'd say the viewpoint I've read that I think makes the most sense is we educate a lot of foreign students, and then we make it really difficult for them to stay in this country. And I see that a lot. We see really talented people who come in for interviews, and then visa and whatnot. And we're one of the startups that actually will work with them to try to make it happen. But it can be overwhelming, right? And I think as a young company, a lot of folks are just I don't want to deal with that. And so I think we're spending all of this time, and these really talented folks are coming here to be educated, and then we basically say leave, and it seems just sort of short-sighted. So I think that probably seems like one of the, it's definitely not easy, because if it was easy it probably would have been done already, but it seems like one of the lost opportunities that we have is just all this immense talent that comes here to train in our awesome universities. Why not let them stay and build companies, or at least work at companies here that can use their talents?
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate around immigration and hiring talent from abroad. Yeah. And I know the startup community generally is in favor of hiring talent from abroad. Yeah,
it all gets bucketed under that immigration mantle, and then people sort of lose their minds, and it starts to mean lots of different things, right? So, but yeah, I think the startup and sort of venture capital communities are all very much, and even probably the big tech companies are all behind this idea of, help, let's keep the talent here that's being educated, but then, I guess politics is politics.
Right. You worked at Cosmo.com, a web delivery service that was launched in the 90s that basically promised to deliver anything to you within an hour.
Right.
A pack of gum, a CD, a candy bar.
Anything you wanted, yeah.
It held a lot of promise, but it went bust in 2001.
Yeah.
Tell us what the experience was like working at a startup in the .com era, in the days of Web 1.0.
I worked there for a little over a year. Still probably most learning I've had in a short time frame, that I can remember. Awesome ride, got to do anything and everything from operations to sales to raising capital. So lots of really good experience. Also saw how to not build a company. So I think you get to learn a lot of things from that. So I think chasing growth without sort of fundamentally sound economics is just a recipe for disaster. So if you buy something for $2 and sell it for $1, like no matter how much you sell, you are never going to make it up in volume. And so I think saw kind of some bad practices as well. But I think in terms of learning, I still keep in touch with a bunch of the guys from Cosmo. So now it's almost 15 years later. So I think it also shows you kind of how much we were all sort of invested in that. We really thought we could make this thing work and sort of change how people receive goods that they want, and with sort of this instant gratification kind of model. But yeah, we kind of expanded too quickly. We didn't really look at fundamentals because we thought we could just raise, our business model was sort of raising venture capital, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and that's not a business model. Like, that's going to end at some point. And then the music stopped, and that was when we sort of, everything went south from there.
Any lessons that you learned from working at a failed startup that you're able to apply to your own business?
One is the fundamental economic kind of underpinnings of the business have to be solid, right? I think the other thing is chasing growth for the sake of growth is not a good thing, right? So Cosmo actually did really well in New York and San Francisco, and then it got into all these markets that were just totally losses for us. And so, chasing growth is great, but like don't chase it just for the sake of chasing it, which is I think a lot of what we did. And then I think humility is really important. We were sort of doing the touchdown dance before we scored the touchdown, right? And so we were like crazy parties where people were like getting up on pianos and kind of, it was great to like rile up the troops, right? And so it like was effective, but it was sort of empty underneath it, right? And so like I think we were thinking we were better than we were. And so I think that's dangerous, right? And so I think, now it's, I think culturally now we're sort of prove it first and then brag. Don't brag first and then, sort of prove it later. But no, I mean, those were sort of the things from a business perspective I learned. I think in terms of like forging a team that really is sort of cohesive and like driven by a mission, Cosmo did a phenomenal job. I mean, we used to work a lot, but it never felt like work. Lots of opportunities. I did good work here. They sent me to London with 3 other guys and said, hey, figure out Europe, right? And I was, 24 at the time or something. So, you don't get those types of opportunities in any other large organization. So it was very merit-based in that way, which I think was fantastic. But so lots of good things, but I think just, business fundamental-wise, those were some pretty big gaps, which I've hopefully won't repeat those mistakes this time around.
You worked at American Express prior to starting CB Insights. Yeah. What made you decide to leave the comforts of working at a big organization to start something on your own?
So when I left Cosmo, when Cosmo sort of was, the writing was on the wall, I thought I'd go to a big company. I needed to get that on my resume, I thought, get some stability, learn like big company skills. I wasn't sure what those were, but I thought there was something called big company skills. So I went, thought I'd stay there for 2 years and then go do my own startup. I ended up staying for 7. I think one, it's a testament to Amex is a really good place to work. The people are really nice, they're very smart. Culturally, it's a great place. So, I got sort of comfortable, right? And I was getting promoted and I was doing well. And so you can sort of get into that corporate lifestyle, right? Which is like, hey, I'm getting more stock and I'm getting a promotion and I got a nicer office and I have a bigger team, and you kind of seem, you can start to feel like you're a big shot. And then I started having conversations about like the next level up toward in 2007, which was like I was a VP, and it was like, hey, what do you have to do to get to SVP? And then I thought at that point it kind of hit me that like if I ever get to that level, I'll never leave. Because life will be so comfortable that like it'll be too hard to give that up. And I said, and I've always wanted to do something entrepreneurial, so I just need to like cut the cord. And so I had some ideas, and I'd thought of a bunch of ideas while I was at Amex, and I tried things like on the side, just like, and they never panned out. But I said, okay, I think I have an idea here that's good. Let's just leave. And so I went and told my boss, and we worked out a plan where I stayed for 6 months to transition everything, and then I kind of made the jump into entrepreneurship.
Did you do entrepreneurial things when you were a child? Like, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
I mean, I kind of grew up in a family where, like, it was somewhat expected you'd work for yourself, right? Like, you don't work for other people. Everybody was in business. Like, it was just like, what do? I do business. Like, that was sort of like the random answer that everybody gave. Some were in textiles or whatever they might have been in. I just grew up around hearing people talk about business and challenges of business, and I saw the work ethic involved in building a business. So to some degree, I feel like it was maybe partially just DNA. And then Cosmo actually, for all of the, even though it didn't make me a millionaire, like, was an awesome, like, sort of fortified that desire that, like, you can, and then I saw technology, and I'm like, you can build amazing things with technology now that weren't possible before. Before you had to go build a factory, or you had to go get a loan and buy stuff and sell it, and it was just like much more, it seemed more daunting. And then technology made it seem simpler. And so I think that was a big driver of me wanting to do something entrepreneurial. I didn't, when I was younger, I sold like candy bars in school and did stuff like that. In college was probably the first time I did something like legitimately entrepreneurial. So I used to throw parties in college, and so we threw
and
parties.
Charge for them,
and we'd rent like, 500 capacity like hotel ballrooms, and we'd like do like, they weren't fancy, but they were like upscale relative to like the frat party that you'd go to, and we'd charge like, $10, $15, $20, and then we got good and we started doing parties in Philadelphia and New York and DC, and I think the furthest one we did was Cleveland, and and so that was just like, there was a rush that came from doing that. That was awesome. And so I like, business is like is my hobby. Like, if somebody's like, hey, I'm doing a business, and like, I just want to understand it. I'm like, oh, how does that work? Like, how do you make money? Like, what happens if this happens? Like, I'm very fascinated by like the ins and outs of like how you do something like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's like really what I like to do.
Do you think entrepreneurship can be taught? Or do you think people are born entrepreneurs?
I think entrepreneurship can be taught, is just like will, right? Because entrepreneurship is like part having a good idea and executing it. It's a big part of it, but part of it is just like, I can't fail, right? And so like, I think being stubborn and just saying like, I'm gonna do this is really important, because entrepreneurship otherwise, like, if you don't have a thick skin, you're gonna quit. I was paying guys out of my savings when we started, because like a bunch of things we thought were going to happen didn't pan out, and like that would have been, and I could have always gone back to Amex. Like, they kind of said, listen, if you ever want to come back, you can come back, and it would have been great to go back in some sense because it would have been safe, but like for me that would have been just like failure at the biggest level. So I think, if you have like just will, I think a lot of the mechanics of entrepreneurship can be taught, right? Like how to talk to a customer, how to, manage revenue and a P&L. Like, those types of elements are all teachable. I don't know if you can teach determination. Like, it's just something you either have or you don't.
Do you think it's important for our school systems to start teaching entrepreneurship?
So I think there's a lot of fundamental skills, the things you have to do to be an entrepreneur, that we should teach students how to do, right? So like, math is important in entrepreneurship, right? Like, how do you, make sure you spend less than you make, right? And so I think like the fundamental building blocks of business, right? How do you talk to people and how do you influence people and how do you sell them, essentially, right? I don't know if it would all fall under an entrepreneurship banner, but I think these are good life skills, right? Like, you're going to need to debate people and influence them in anything you do, right? You're gonna, have a bad experience with a merchant, and you're gonna need to get them to see your point of view. That's not necessarily entrepreneurship. That's just being able to influence and talk to people well. That's a good skill, and that'll serve you well as an entrepreneur, right? Knowing how to do math is gonna help you in life in general. So I think, just teaching life skills the appropriate way can make people a better entrepreneur. Yeah, I think if kids learned how to build a business from scratch and like what went into it and how to work together, I think that's a great experience. So if we could do it, I think it's a great skill to learn.
Okay. What are some of the biggest challenges you face as an entrepreneur?
So I think it changes over time, right? So when you're just starting out, it's how do I build this product? Like, how come nobody calls me back, right? Like, how come I can't get any press, right? Like, you just have like basic survival problems, right? Like, how am I going to make payroll, right? So, and then as you get past that, so like we're past that stage of problems, right? And so now it's all about how do we grow, how do we find talent, how do we build a culture, right? When it was 5 people in a room or 10 people in a room, culture sort of just happened organically, right? But now when you're 20 or 30, right, the people who are, the 30th employee hasn't seen the 125 square foot office, hasn't seen like all that really terrible part of building the business. And so how do you kind of maintain scrappiness and whatnot? So I think like, now we have sort of higher level problems, than we used to. So they just change over time. I think in the beginning it's really, how do I find a customer? How do I get financing if that's what you need? How do I find talent? How do I convince somebody that, I have nothing and you have other prospects from a career perspective, but you should join this thing that is nothing because of, you believe in me, essentially. It's a really hard thing to do. And it's hard to, you're convincing somebody who has other options. You have to feel, at least for me, I have to feel really good in my gut that I'm not leading that person down the wrong path, right? Like I don't want somebody to come who's got student debt or whatever to join, and then like as a result of joining me, he's worse off than he would have been if he'd gone to, big bank X. So in the beginning, those are the problems, and now we're just like working on scaling problems.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about some leadership lessons you've learned as a young leader.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm young anymore, but I think maybe this is part of like my New York mentality, right? I thought initially like people just came to work for a paycheck. And that's obviously like a very important part of why you come to work. But I think, leadership is giving people context for why they're doing what they're doing, right? So what is this piece of work you're doing? What does it mean in the totality of what we're trying to accomplish, right? So people want context. I think people want to feel like they're doing something that is meaningful, right? And not like meaningful in like the sort of, change the world way that like everybody talks about, but like, if you're building a product, like just knowing that other people use that product is gratifying, right? And so I think people want that type of kind of reinforcement of what they're doing. And so I think initially I just kind of thought it was a very black and white numbers and cents type of thing. And people aren't always just coming for that. They want to be surrounded by other smart people. So they want to be in a place where they're going to learn from other folks. So I think, if you find, from my perspective, like leadership is sort of finding good people and then giving them capabilities and people and context to help them be successful. I think that's really important. I think the other thing I've learned is sort of leadership is situational. So it's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing. So somebody might have skills in a particular area and you have to then train them and teach them and work with them in a certain way. And somebody else has a very different approach to learning and doing work. You have to approach them in a way that works for them. I think initially I might have tried to just say, okay, well, here's what we need to do, and just assume like everybody learns and does things in that same way, and that doesn't work.
So, not one size fits all.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the whole idea of it being situational was really important for me. And then I think, I finally kind of come around to this, to understanding the importance of culture, right? So like I, again, thought it would just happen organically. You hire smart people, you build good products, you make customers happy, and like culture just happens. And it does, you will build a culture that way, but I don't know if you'll build the culture that you want. So I think right now, like we're spending a lot of time thinking about like, how do we build the culture sort of as the operating system of the company the right way? So I spend a lot of time now doing stuff that's like, 2 years ago, if you asked me like, hey, you told me you're going to be doing all this work on culture, I'd be like, no, I'm not. I'm going to be selling subscriptions. Like that's what we do. We make money. Like I'm not going to bother with that. And like, now as the company grows, I've started to see like it's really important, and it's not something that I can just pay lip service to. I actually have to like spend time and build, try to help build it along with the team. You sort of constantly get humbled. Like every time you feel like you know what you're doing, then you like sort of realize you don't. Luckily, I think the one nice thing is like, especially within technology and the startup community, people share their wisdom. They're pretty gracious about that. So whether it's in person or even just online, I think we've learned like a ton by just reading what other successful people have done. who like very tactically talk about some of these things and sort of influence our thinking. So learning can happen now like all the time in some sense, because like there's just so many people out there who are nice enough to share the things that they've messed up and how they fix them, and then you can avoid at least some of those mistakes.
Sure. What's been one of your most memorable experiences as an entrepreneur?
You know, so when we started, we were going to do a bunch of consulting engagements, and the recession hit, and we lost all of those. So I started, and I was pretty newly married at the time, and so we started paying people, like a couple of folks on the team, out of savings, right? And so like that was a fairly interesting time in life, right? So like not only had I left a job where I was getting a steady paycheck and a nice paycheck, I was actually now like not just getting zero income, but like the savings were actually getting depleted at a pretty rapid rate every 2 weeks. So we kept kind of struggling along, and nothing was really clicking, and we were really just scrambling, and we started doing work for hedge funds. And we built this product, talked to a bunch of hedge funds. They said, like, you know, not interested. And, you know, we were probably a month away from just like calling it, packing it all in. And we got a call from somebody who said, hey, listen, I know you guys do this credit card industry stuff for the hedge fund industry. I think right now is the right time for that product. And it was somebody we talked to a while ago who liked the product. He's a really smart guy. He was just like, this isn't what people want today. They're gonna want it. And you know, we just thought he was maybe just giving us the nice rejection. And he called 6 months later and said, like, now is the time. And like the sort of the border between whether you're gonna survive or not sometimes can be very, very close. And so, you know, we got lucky, right, in some sense. Like, as much as I'd like to believe everything that's happened to us has been because of skill and insight and all these things that, you know, are attributable to actions we've taken, that was just purely luck of having met that person remembering us, and us having built a good product. If he'd called us 4 weeks later, I might have been back at American Express, right? So just, you know, I think luck is probably, you know, a really big driver of whether you make it or not in business, so.
What career advice would you give somebody who's looking to start their own business?
I would say try to have 18 months to 2 years of life expenses set aside, right? I think like you want to pursue your business 100%, and if you're worried about how you're going to make your rent or how you're going to eat, you're not going to do that, and you're not going to make the right decision. So I'd say like fundamentally like have enough money in the bank to be able to do this. Getting into debt and whatnot, like I know the stories get glamorized a bit, like, oh, this person, like, you know, was on the precipice of bankruptcy and then they made it. Like, I think for every story like that, there's other 100, like those people are actually bankrupt and they're miserable. So I don't think that's a really responsible thing to do. So I would say have the money in the bank, and then from there, while you're doing that, there's a lot you can do to set the stage for being an entrepreneur before you even have left your job, right? So you should start talking to customers. Don't build anything until you've, and I'm maybe taking a bit of a technology bent to this, but don't build a product until you've talked to customers and actually seen that like this is a problem they have, right? So, because sometimes you'll build a solution that then goes out and looks for a problem. And like that was actually our first product, was like that. It was like, you know, related to what we do, but it was a problem that nobody really had. So we built this awesome thing, and then like nobody cared about it, right? And so that was because we just didn't pay attention. Like we didn't actually ask people what they wanted. So I think you can do a lot of legwork before you've even jumped in, and then, you know, you'll be better positioned. I think you won't be worried about making the rent. You'll have customers, or you'll at least have perspective from eventual customers, so that you're building the right product. Talk to customers like a lot. I think that's really critical. And then market yourself early, right? So I think like you can wait to have the product be perfect and then spend 2 years building a product and then market it, but that's probably just not a good way to do it. You know, market to customers early. You'll get really good feedback if you're doing something meaningful. And if nobody responds, that's actually a good signal to you that you're probably building something that nobody cares about, and it might be time to look in a different direction.
And is there any one thing that you would advise somebody not to do?
I wouldn't look for funding before you've talked to customers, right? So I think like funding is not success. Funding is a ingredient for success, right? But like you're ultimately trying to build the final product is a real business, and funding could help get you there. But I think a lot of times, at least what I'm seeing now, is like entrepreneurs look for funding first, and they think of that as like the hallmark of being successful. Funding is like hiring or building your website. Like, it's just a fundamental part maybe of what you need to do, but getting funding, like a lot of companies get funding that don't go anywhere. So I think, talking to customers, and they're the folks I think you really need to spend the most time with from the get-go.
Yeah. What are some things you do to keep your employees motivated?
We're trying a bunch of things now. I think we're trying to figure out how to make this all work. So I think, we have sort of your typical kind of fun type of events. We're doing a cooking class, and we're doing a arcade game tournament next week. And so, we kind of just things that help people get out of the office and just bond with each other. I think, culturally, the other thing we're trying to do is get people to experiment. So we're starting something we're calling hack days, right? Where anybody in the company can propose an idea that they think could be meaningful, and the team is going to vote on whether they like it or not. And if 3 or 4 ideas get sort of good responses, we're going to just take 3 days off, or 5 days, or whatever. We haven't figured out all the details. We're going to take some time off, and we're going to actually build that product. And that product may eventually become something that's really important to us and part of our core product. It might be a fun side project, or it might just be something that the team got to bond around. People who don't necessarily always work together got to work together on and learn something new. I think, trying to keep that entrepreneurial culture is really important. And I think we have a team that has a lot of great ideas. We need to do a better job of helping them surface those ideas. So I think that's another big thing that we're working on now. So
startup spaces have a reputation for being fun and interactive. Tell us what CB Insight's office is like.
We are not the type of startup with like a ball pit and jungle gym. Like, we don't really do all that. Partly because I think we're so focused on customers and on just revenue. So we're heads down when it comes to our work. I think we have a gong, which when somebody does something meaningful, whether it's a sale or something developed, or they wrote a research brief that's doing really well, folks will ring, and then you'll kind of run back to your email and see what it was about, because they'll send an email out to the team. Mm-hmm. So I think we do things that are events and team building type of things, but the office itself is like, I think we want a place where people want to hang out and enjoy coming to work, and so we're actually like redesigning our office and getting an interior decorator right now to do all of that. So it'll be a nice place to work, but it's not kind of crazy with all sorts of like adornments. We provide lunch to the team every day. So it's got some of those sort of key things that we think make life nice for folks. Snacks and cereal and fruits and all that good stuff, but yeah, nothing too crazy.
And a great culture, right?
Yeah, I think culture, like, I think a lot of times people mistake ball pits and ping pong tables and foosball tables with culture, and those are nice things to have, but I don't think like having beer in the fridge is culture, right? I mean, I think it could be a nice thing to have, and it could be a great thing for the team to just like bond and do things like that, but I don't know if those tactics are what determine culture. I think you have a culture, and then you'll do things that maybe reinforce that. And so I think that's our approach to it. But we're still learning how to do this for sure.
Yeah. Okay, Anand. Well, this was great.
Okay,
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.